Hi everybody. COVID-19 has changed the way that we look. It's changed the way that our lives look. But we can transcend the physical distance through this video. And a pandemic doesn't need to mean that our lives lack color or purpose. Welcome to this video on how to cope with quarantine in times of COVID-19. This faith-based mental health presentation is brought to you by Interfaith Community Services and sponsored by San Diego County Health and Human Services Agency. Together we seek to destigmatize mental health conditions and advocate for the importance of faith in supporting those affected, as well as the value of faith in treatment and recovery experience. We have and will offer community presentations in your faith home once the need to practice social distancing is no longer necessary. In the meantime, we'll offer presentations on social media platforms to stay in touch and continue to share important information. Many of us feel anxious, fearful, and lonely at this time, and we want you to know that we're here for you. As a disclaimer, our materials are based on Christian beliefs, but we do offer classes to all faiths, and will work with any non-Christian faith to adapt our presentation materials. Stay well, and we pray that you enjoy this presentation, and feel free to share it with others. Some of the things that we'll cover during this presentation are 1. Emotions during COVID-19 quarantine. Some of those emotions can include grief. So 2, we'll look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. There are things we can do though, and so 3, we'll look at some of those things. In section 4, we'll move on to a spiritual first aid kit, and I'll talk about some of the spiritual reprioritizing that came from my bipolar experience. 5, we'll move on to the anxiety prayer journal. 6, we'll talk about supporting others, children and older adults. And 7, we'll discuss what will happen once we're released from quarantine. So walk with me on this journey. And who are you, you might ask? Well, hi, my name is Josh. I'm South African born and raised, now living in San Diego, California. Living the American dream, which does have its ups and downs. There's a global unity despite our seclusion at this time. It's a time that tests both psyche and spirit, things both close to my heart. Since I got a psychology degree in South Africa and a theology degree in Pasadena, my passion is to unite the two and to draw out the synergy that can come from both of them. I'm also someone whose mental health journey has not always been smooth, and I was diagnosed bipolar type 1. I'll touch later on some of the existential parallels to my experience of bipolar and what the world is going through now. I now work in the mental health movement as a peer, and it's an honor to come to you today from a place of mutuality, from our common humanity. Let's talk about the emotional roller coaster and the variety of emotions that can result from our COVID-19 quarantine. Some of the emotions we may experience during COVID-19 quarantine include fear and anxiety, boredom, frustration, stigmatization, stress, and grief. So let's go through these one by one. Firstly, fear and anxiety. When we feel things are beyond our control, our level of fear increases because of the risk we perceive. We can step into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and our primal amygdala can take control of our brain. This can serve a purpose, but it can also dampen the ability of our prefrontal rational brain, the cortex, to be able to problem solve and keep things in perspective. We may also experience boredom and depression. The lack of opportunities to use our abilities can dampen moods and lead to a general sense of sadness and loss of interest. We might not begin to stretch our legs as much, and we may not be able to stretch our creative capacities as much either. But there are ways to reframe the situation so that we can creatively tap into some of the potential that it holds. Many of us experience frustration and anger. Forced confinement, restricted movement, and not being able to engage in everyday activities elevates frustration levels. We could be angry at the government, at foreign countries, at people who are spreading the disease, the companies we work for, those in our own household who we're spending so much time with all of a sudden. We may also experience stigmatization. Guilt and fear, not just about the unknown, but how others might perceive us, now or in the future. In the time of Mother Teresa, she worked with the poor of India, many of whom their society considered untouchable. Now almost everyone in our society is untouchable, including us, and this can change the way that we see ourselves and the way we see others. A lot of us experience stress during this infectious disease outbreak. This can include fear and worry about health. It can also lead to grief as we're losing the way of life that we knew. Even if it's temporarily, we're having to let go of certain things. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model outlines 5 stages of grief. These are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The faster you work through these stages, particularly the first three, and get to acceptance, the better moving forward. Though the model is not linear and people can go back and forth between the stages, as well as experience more than one stage at one time. Our emotional response to situations is like our fingerprints. There are patterns that exist amongst humanity, but each emotional response is unique to us, and that's okay. So Kubler-Ross's stages include denial. We may think that the COVID situation is not even real and be like, oh, forget it, everything's just going to go back to normal. We may also experience anger, outrage, and blaming. We can experience the bargaining stage, where we make trade-offs for things. And we can also experience depression, feeling of hopelessness or helplessness. And we can move through to acceptance, a place for exploring our options and moving on. Let's talk about how we could do that, because there are things that we can do. It's important to take care of yourself, to be able to take care of your family and your friends. Helping others can also make you and your community stronger. Psychological research offers some suggestions on how to cope with feelings associated with quarantine. We can take a proactive approach, stay connected, take care of our bodies, manage our media consumption, and connect ourselves spiritually. We are biopsychosocial spiritual beings, and thriving involves enriching each one of these aspects. So let's talk about these one by one. Firstly, we can take a proactive approach. It's okay to be afraid, and there are also ways that we can deal with this fear. Planning and identifying what we can control help us to feel like we have a purpose and are making progress. The serenity prayer, which is so important to many of our sobriety communities, prays that we may have the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This spirit of discernment, of wisdom in this season is particularly relevant. Although it's relevant through the rest of our lives, it's particularly pertinent now. We can also stay connected. We're a social species, and connecting with friends and family has positive effects on our well-being. Reflective listening is an excellent communication technique where you listen to what a person says and repeat it back to them. There are many online connection platforms available, and it's easier than ever to connect to loved ones and make new friends across the globe as we all go through this together. We can take care of our body. The critical self-care activities are sleep, physical exercise, and a healthy diet. Another thing that we can do is manage our media consumption. Consuming too much media in a crisis situation is associated with increased levels of stress. In this time when the media can take advantage of our fear to sell clicks, it's important to take back power of our own minds and paradigms and to find the balance. And finally, we can connect ourselves spiritually. Studies show that people who participate in a spiritual or religious community of any kind have a lower risk of illness than those who do not. Through spirituality and prayer, people can feel motivated, hopeful, and encouraged to move on. It's easier than ever to connect online with your own faith community, and there even maybe connect to those who you don't happen to bump into when you go to your weekly gatherings. You could also attend that famous church across the country, across the globe, and attend it in the same capacity as its members right now. That moves us on to our spiritual first aid kit, to be with you as you process the fast-changing and stressful pandemic. Drawing on the wisdom of the biblical tradition, the Bible in Psalm 46 tells us that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Jesus says, "So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today." He also asks, who by worrying can add a single hour to their life? Psalm 121 tells us, "I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth." Jesus calls to us in Matthew 11 and says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And finally, Psalm 23 tells us, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." During my bipolar episodes, the world I knew also went through a drastic metamorphosis. And yes, metamorphosis involves mess. There are a lot of parallels to the metamorphosis the world is going through at the moment. In my case, it led to forced hospitalization 6 times. I had to quit my job because I could no longer work. I had to drop all my classes at school, and I lost $86,000 during this time. I was afraid I would never come out of it. I was super uncertain about the future, and I read the biblical book of Job over and over. But when much of my old world was burnt off, God was able to rearrange things that align much closer with my actual priorities. For instance, the very fact that I went through this allowed me to work in the peer support specialist field, which has opened up such deep meaning and purpose to me now, which wasn't available to me before. And for me, it's existentially worth way more than the $86,000 that I lost. I did come out of my depression, and through the practices mentioned in this video, have become solid in a new kind of life. I realized that, like Jesus' parable, my life may have been built on the shifting sands of capitalism and culture. And when the house came crashing down, when our society is in the midst of metamorphosis, there's a chance to re-examine our investments and whether the ladders we have put up are leaning up against the right walls that will sustain us in the long term. We have a chance now to become more acquainted with ourselves, with our deepest fears and longings, which is not always comfortable, but is often fruitful. One of the ways that we can process this is the anxiety prayer journal. Defeating worry is a matter of learning how to control our thoughts. The anxiety journal is a worksheet which you can use to overcome your anxieties according to Philippians 4:6-9, which says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is anything excellent or anything worthy of praise, think about these things. This picture shown here shows how God has control of the natural world in ways that surpass our understanding, and our faith is in Him. Again, with the serenity prayer, there are certain things we can't control, but there are certain things we can. And the brain's malleability, known as neuroplasticity, proves that we can rewire the circuitry of our own mind. So very practically, the way that you can write this down is make 4 headings. Under the first one, what am I worried about? Describe the exact nature of your anxiety in the first person. Underneath the words biblical prayer, write down your personal prayer. Underneath the words biblical thoughts, write out how you're going to think about your concern so as not to worry. Use Philippians 4:8 as a guideline. This is thinking about what's true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, excellent, and worthy of praise. And then finally, under the words biblical actions, write out specific actions you can take. Try it. In section 6, let's talk about ways to support others. Firstly, supporting children and teens. And children and teens react in part on what they see from adults around them. When parents and caregivers react calmly and confidently, they can provide the best support for their children. Some common changes during a stressful situation on children and teens include excessive crying or irritation in younger children, returning to behaviors they've outgrown, excessive worry or sadness, irritability and acting out behaviors in teens, difficulty with attention and concentration, and the use of alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs. Things that we can do to support our children and teens are to reassure them that they're safe. Limit your family's exposure to news coverage of the event. Try to keep up with regular routines as much as possible and to be a role model. In supporting older adults, we can regularly check in on our older adult friends and neighbors and family members and call them to see how they're doing, letting them know that we're there for them. Ask them how their routines might have had to change and what kinds of things they're doing to cope with the stress. Encourage them to keep doing the activities that are allowed during COVID-19 for their local area, such as daily walks or exercise, stretching, listening to or playing music, reading, enjoying favorite or humorous shows, puzzles, games, social activities, and meditation and prayer. We can help them seek medical advice or care if they're experiencing symptoms of physical or mental health decline. We can offer to bring them a meal, run an errand, or walk their dog. We can also seek advice from them based on their experience and wisdom, which they often love to share. We can practice gratitude and appreciation for any support that we get from our relationship with them. Make sure that they know you're grateful that they're part of your life. Some of the things that Mental Health America says we can do to care for ourselves while practicing social distancing include eating healthfully, exercise, practicing relaxation techniques, which as a matter of fact may keep you healthy, as overstress can increase the cortisol in your system, which can lower your immune system. We can let light in. This is something that I'm particularly fond of and which re-energizes me. And although it's been incredibly rainy in San Diego in this season, I'm still able to find the opportunities to get out into nature and to absorb the sun's light. We can be kind to ourselves. We can monitor our media consumption and we can stay connected. What's going to happen once we're released from the COVID-19 quarantine? Being separate from others can be stressful, even if we don't get sick. Everybody feels differently after coming out of quarantine, and some of these feelings may include mixed emotions, including relief, but also fear and worry about our own health and the health of others. We can experience stress from monitoring ourselves or being monitored by others for signs and symptoms of COVID-19. We may experience sadness, anger, or frustration because friends or loved ones have unfounded fears of contracting the disease from contact with us, even though we may not be determined to be contagious. We may feel guilt about being unable to perform normal work or parenting duties due to the quarantine. There may be other emotional or mental health challenges, and we could possibly see symptoms of a collective adjustment disorder. Children may also feel upset or have other strong emotions if they or someone they know has been released from quarantine. But there are resources. There is opportunity to connect and to learn and to grow. Here's some of them. Feel free to pause the video and write them down if you like. And here's another page of them. Some of the sources that we've drawn from in the making of this video include these. So thank you to them. We're here with you and we're all together in this season globally, unlike almost any other historical season. And we want to hear from you. We welcome your comments and please let us know if there are other topics that you would like us to address. If you did not receive an invite to join the site and would like to be added to our invitation list, please send an email to mgarzone@interfaithservices.org. It's been an honor and a joy to come to you in this season, transcending physical isolation with social connectedness. Stay well.